Regulatory reform. Look, your supervisor just gave you a great testimony. I hear it every day. My goodness gracious. I heard it yesterday in my hometown in Kinderhook. You know, we've got a firm down there, a biomedical company, and you know, they're dealing with a new regulation coming from the FDA that's going to regulate saliva drug tests, and it threatens 20% of their bottom line. They've already had to lay off some workers. They've got a little over 100 right now. This is, and you know, when you start to dig into it, you say, why are we doing this? You know, in so many times, you're absolutely right, where we have duplicative regulation. And what makes it worse is sometimes it's kind of cocked in different directions. So you've got a small business that's trying to negotiate the federal, they're dealing with the Army Corps of Engineers, and then they're dealing with the DEC, and it's a slightly different take. And it's not even simultaneous. Sometimes it's sequential, which is really frustrating. It can take business owners sometimes 5 years to bring into fruition a great idea. We've got to do better than that. Think about it. When the government does it on us, they say you got 30 days. You got 30 days. Everybody, you guys know this process to review and comment for 30 days, right? When they throw a new bureaucratic rule on you. But why is it when a small business owner comes forward with an idea, it's question mark? It's absolutely question mark. There's not even a stipulation on it. Here's how I think we need to address this. The first thing that we need to do is do this. There's a bill before the Congress called Reins In. I want to help co-sponsor it and bring it into law. Here's why. This bill says that any time that the bureaucracy, a bureaucratic agency, implements a rule that impacts $100 million or greater in our economy, it has to go to the people's representatives. They don't have the authority to totally. It has to go to the people's representatives, because you know what? I vote on it. You're not. I know you're awake up here, and you're going to look. If you don't like what I'm doing, you can fire me. That's the problem. We get frustrated now. There's a rule, for example, that impacts the top of cars. You know, the strength, $1 billion is the estimate on the economy. Now that's 1/13 of our economy. When you look at, you know, what our GDP is. And that wasn't even the people's representatives that did that. We should have a say. We the people. This is our government. We need to pass this Reins In. That's going to help us rein in regulation and to start getting our accountability back in this government. The other point has to do with when you get the legislative intent of regulation, and then it gets in the hands, you get administrative law, then you get bureaucratic rule. When you get that bureaucratic rule, the problem is over time, you can hardly even recognize. Look at the Clean Water Act, right? And you look at Section 404. Section 404, what has to do with wetlands and how the permitting process goes about. It is, in my view, it is so far from where the original language and intent was. I mean, it's to the point now where when you're, and you, of course, you guys have it, you got to deal with the APA too. But I mean, it is, you go across the district, and right now it is so difficult that if you even have remotely an idea that you're going to want to do some kind of project, you go to the Corps now. Instead of regulation, you know, working passively, we're having to go to the Corps of Engineers to get a no jurisdiction. Because there's so much discretion in the Army Corps. It totally depends. It should not be that way. There should be legislative language that gives the intent of the people through their representatives how to do it. And that kind of, when you have such empowerment of a bureaucratic leader, there's no accountability. And that's part of the problem with Section 404, and it needs to be reworked, and that's another example. But there's so many, I don't have time to go through every one, but we have to have regulatory relief. We're going to have to go through, I think what we need is leadership in the Congress. You know, you hear about this Presidential Debt Commission. What we need to do is we need leadership in the Congress that looks at the size of the federal government, that looks for regulatory relief opportunities, and also reducing the size of the federal government. You know, we have too many federal departments right now. Too many. I want to give you one example because my opponent is hitting me now. He's got an ad up, I'm told. I haven't seen it, but saying that I don't care about education.
Oh, yes. My 8-year-old asked me to ask you that.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
I went through public schools. You know, Mary Jo, our kids go to public schools. We love our kids. DC isn't going to be the answer. You know, every dollar we send to DC, we get about 80 to 85 cents back, depending on what the initiative is or the given year. It is not, the answer is not going to come. You know, I think everybody's tracking that the Department of Education is a 1970s creation, right? That was not created a long time ago. That was a Jimmy Carter thing, the Department of Education. And if I had to ask you, do you think we're better or worse off since we created the Department of Education? What do you think?
Worse.
Yet we're spending all that money. That's my point. You know, before we created this bureaucracy, you know, we got to feed the beast. When you create it, you got to pay the salaries, you got to pay the benefits, you got to pay the pension obligations, you got to build the building, you got to do all the operations and maintenance. And how's that helping the school board here in Chestertown? It's not helping it. And someone will say, well, look at Race to the Top. Why can't we do that right at the state? Why do we have to do that from Washington, D.C.? Hey, it makes sense to me why we would have a Department of Education here at the state. Why does that make sense to me? Because of my experiences. You know, we execute education at the school district level. You've got school boards, you've got teachers, you've got parents, you've got students, and that school board needs supervision. It makes sense to me that you have a state Department of Education. They're checkers, and they do other things. But do we really need checkers for checkers? No. That's a problem, because we're paying for all that. So I oppose that. I think we could scale that down. We could take a hard look at the Department of Education. You know, before it was a separate education, it was coupled. It had, you know, you had health, education, and welfare. It was called Q, right? And what we did is we grew the size of government. We need to stop that. We need to look across the federal government in areas where we can consolidate, so we can save money. Is that any different from our small business owners in here? You do the same thing. When you're overstructured, you have to restructure. We've got the same problem in our federal government. It is growing so big that it's on our back, and we can't afford it. So I'm for that too. And so we're going to grow the private sector economy. We're going to begin to balance our budget by growing the private sector economy, so we're not paying 10% unemployment, and we're gaining in receipts. And then we're going to roll back that reckless additional spending that was done in the last 20 months, and then we're going to consolidate the federal government so we can save money from that restructuring. And that's what's going to get us to grow our private sector economy, begin to balance our budget through reduced federal spending, not increasing the taxes, and we're going to work to protect your freedoms. Protect your freedoms.